If someone was to ask me what the biggest takeaway from this project was, I would without a beat say the learning and growth aspect of it. The first time we filmed, we used natural lighting, and I had absolutely no idea how to fix the ISO settings in my DSLR. And I knew near next to nothing in regards to the technicalities of my camera. I realized I did get a lot better at my camera work throughout the shots we'd been getting. They got a lot steadier, and they had a lot more movement, and overall they just suited the vision much more. I think it's because I started experimenting with tilts, pan-ins, pan-outs, and track shots. They all added so much more to the scenes in comparison to just static shots. If we take some of the last love shots where they are facing each other and there's this intensity and build up, they have a great contributor, and that is the camera work. I started getting more comfortable with understanding what scene would require what kind of lighting and how I would like to shoot in what setting. What props actually look good, what looks good on screen, and how I needed the actors to act. And I think that's where the director role in me stepped up, because I knew what was required behind the scene. I could see it. So by the end of it, there were things that felt like second nature, and understanding those things, you're being able to see my mistakes in regards to the set, acting, camera work, lighting, and sound. It all just felt easier. I remember how during the preliminaries I would feel so lost, and now I can just walk onto set and feel like I know exactly what needs to be done. Even improvising doesn't feel scary. In fact, it's quite the adventure for me and my team. Just the little things along the way I gathered helped me so much, and all the failed shoots we've had. I remember this one shoot we had early in the morning where the two actors were supposed to be in bed, and I dressed them in white tees because in person it suited the vision quite a lot. They looked very casually and messily dressed, but what I didn't take into account was how it would show up on screen. The acting and the shots were nice, and they were aesthetically very pleasing, but it did not show up well on screen, and with the limited color grading knowledge I had at the time, I couldn't salvage or make the clip fit into our montage. So this made me realize how I should go for more natural lighting, like sunlight or some kind of warm lighting for the love montage. I wanted the love montage's color and lighting to look like a beautiful, distant yet familiar memory. You know, one of those special ones, almost like what would play in your head before you die. With each and every failed shoot came a lesson. Another shoot we had was where John was supposed to address the audience and have a speech that would sway the crowd, and it was supposed to be an insight into how he keeps this facade up, right? This facade of being a perfect, lovable, charismatic political figure to everyone. And we would have gotten insight into how he would interact with his wife in front of everyone. And the idea in theory was great and would have definitely added dimension to the story. We also got a great office space, which we later converted into a public arena looking space for the shoot. We got 2 people as the bodyguards and a publicist who would have set his speech on the podium. We arranged for a podium and a mic, and we got ring lights and a mic that was connected to the laptop to pick up on the sounds, to further the room tone and the sound bed. We also set up the crowd cheering on the television to create a sound bed so that in post-production we have some room tone to work with. Everything was set, but on screen the execution was so weak and the lighting was too harsh, and the set, even after a lot of work and effort, didn't look like something we wanted to keep in our project. And the actor didn't seem to be able to deliver what I had envisioned for the project. The reason I'm referencing all of these failed shoots is not because we are a bad team or we don't know how to film. It's because it gave me a lot of confidence, and ultimately we had better work at the end. If I was told a couple months back just how many failed shoots we would have had, I would have been very worried, but I cannot emphasize enough on how much I needed that. Even the last scene where she's holding the gun, I shot it thrice. We went there 3 days in a row and waited for nightfall to shoot that scene. I think I also lost all sense of fear while filming, because I was filming that scene on a ledge and I was walking backwards with no support to get that pan out effect. So this field of work requires a lot of trust, and I think that's also something from a personal point of view that I gained a lot of confidence in, the fact that I could trust my team fully. I grew to trust Serena's vision and vice versa. I remember how in the beginning we had some shoots in the car and the angles just weren't looking right and the lighting looked extremely unflattering. it just didn't create the kind of mood we were going for, and the only thing that remotely looked good were close-up shots, which me and Serena didn't seem to agree upon at the time. After the shoot, we both saw the footage and we realized that unless she would trust me, who was behind the camera, this wouldn't work out. So gaining each other's trust in the creative capacity was a huge thing on both sides. Another scene where we used a lot of improv and determination was the post-merger scene, which was also the opening scene, so it needed to be very powerful. We initially asked a friend whose father was a police officer for flashing lights for our scene, but quickly realized that the intensity of that light would not have been enough for the scene to be properly executed. So we ended up using 3 cars and putting colored overlay sheets on the headlights. And another problem that we encountered was that my DSLR could not pick up on the dark lighting, so I had to film it with my camera very last minute. And there were times where because it was a tilt, the camera work would be great, but the acting would not suit the vision, and vice versa. Like sometimes the camera work was shoddy and the acting was great, but we had to strike that perfect balance where the camera work and the acting made a good scene. Another scene where we used a lot of improv and determination was the post-merger scene, which was also the opening scene, so it needed to be very powerful. We initially asked a friend whose father was a police officer for flashing lights for our scene, but quickly realized that the intensity of that light would not have been enough for the scene to be properly executed. So we ended up using 3 cars and putting colored overlay sheets on the headlights. And another problem that we encountered was that my DSLR could not pick up on the dark lighting, so I had to film it with my camera very last minute. And there were times where because it was a tilt, the camera work would be great, but the acting would not suit the vision, and vice versa. Like sometimes the camera work was shoddy and the acting was great, but we had to strike that perfect balance where the camera work and the acting made a good scene. Another scene where we used a lot of improv and determination was the post-merger scene, which was also the opening scene, so it needed to be very powerful. We initially asked a friend whose father was a police officer for flashing lights for our scene, but quickly realized that the intensity of that light would not have been enough for the scene to be properly executed. So we ended up using 3 cars and putting colored overlay sheets on the headlights. And another problem that we encountered was that my DSLR could not pick up on the dark lighting, so I had to film it with my camera very last minute. And there were times where because it was a tilt, the camera work would be great, but the acting would not suit the vision, and vice versa. Like sometimes the camera work was shoddy and the acting was great, but we had to strike that perfect balance where the camera work and the acting made a good scene. I decided and improvised on props and costumes with almost every scene in our film. The original vision evolved and grew into something better, more cohesive and refined. We learned to think of the scenes and props and costumes in a way that is not just about them, but how they all complement each other and how they look as a whole. Because more often than not, we saw how each idea or scene was just good on their own, but put together they didn't have any harmony or unity. They felt very disconnected and forced. Once we changed our focus from only seeing everything in details to seeing the project as a whole, it changed everything. Another thing we realized while filming is that the initial vision of almost everything has to be compromised, and not in a bad way, but having the capacity within yourself to accept change in script, location, timing can end in a better product. There were multiple things we would talk about and fully plan out, but when it wouldn't materialize the way we envisioned, it would be very disappointing. So very early on we figured out how not to feel disappointed, but to learn to work around the original vision. I think my biggest test came not during the production and the filming, but the post-production, when I had to step up as the main editor of the project, I had to learn editing almost overnight because our editor could not step up to their role, and that was something that was very challenging, but I enjoyed a lot. And I found that I have a lot of creative freedom, and I could manipulate a lot of the clips to look the way our vision was, or just change the vision entirely. I think being the director of photography as well as the editor gave me quite an edge in both of these roles, because while I would be editing, I would know exactly what clips to use because I was the one who filmed everything, and then while I was filming, I would see it from an editing point of view, like how I would cut the clips, how I would fade them in, and what I would do. So post-production, while shooting, I had that in mind. I did not have this sense of planning before, like during the preliminaries, and I think that is very much visible because we spent 2.5 months filming this, and the preliminaries, even though they had more structure, they were just not as fluid because we weren't as familiar, and I personally wasn't as comfortable and confident in my work. The way I went about filming a lot of the scenes were to have a relatively open-ended scene where the audience can take it upon themselves to imagine what exactly happened. You see this from the very first scene, where we don't explicitly say she murdered her husband, but by the end of it, through a gradual build-up, we find out she has, with the last scene where she's holding the gun in all her victorious glory. The big takeaway from this very scattered journey is that I grew to love this subject, and once I grew to love something, especially in the work capacity, there's nothing I wouldn't do for it. I saw how the trajectory of my life completely changed because of this new love for media I found, filmmaking to be precise. And from December to now, there has been so much development in my thought process when I'm consuming any form of media text.